Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Nehemiah, the 9th chapter, dealing with, as you can see, it says the people confess their sin. And, at this point, right, we've had, you had Ezra and Nehemiah and, certain other notable men, along with the priests and the scribes who were breaking down, the law to the people, right, as it was read, and the people were, cut, right, for lack of a better word. They were cut in the spirit, but they were still exhorted not to mourn, but rather to rejoice, for that day was a holy day, right, a special day. So continuing from there, this is Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 1. Now in the 24th day of this month, the children of Israel were assembled with fasting, and with sackcloths and earth upon them. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all the strangers, and stood and confessed their sins, and the iniquities of their fathers. Because remember, even when we read in the book of Ezra, when he came back, he came to behold how you had Israelites intermingling with the heathens, right, on a unlawful manner, in which they were marrying them, right, giving their daughters to marry their men, and their wives, their men to marry the heathen daughters, women, and so on, right. So there was even post, right, just post captivity, there was still a great level of iniquity that was going on amongst Israelites. You would think that they would have learned just coming out of captivity, but such is the way of Israelites, unfortunately, right? So continuing, it says, and they stood up in their place and read in the book of the law of the Lord Yahweh their God 1/4 part of the day, and another 4th part they confessed. So you have, I forgot which chapter we went into, but you had the 4 watches, right, in the day, starting from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. is the first watch, right, and then you had the 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. noon, second watch, and then you had 12 to 3, which is the third watch, and then you had 3 to 6, which is the 4th watch. And so the as it says here, 1/4 part of the day, right, for about 3 hours, they would read in the law, and then for the next part, as it says, they confessed and worshiped the Lord their God. Verse 4, then stood up upon the stairs of the Levites Jeshua and Bani, Kadmiel, Shabaniah, Buni, Sherebiah, Bani, and Chenani, and cried with a loud voice unto the Lord Yahweh their God. Then the Levites Jeshua and Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabniah, Sherebiah, Hodijah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah said, stand up and bless the Lord Yahweh your God forever and ever, and blessed be thy glorious name, which is exalted above all blessing and praise. Thou, even thou, art Lord Yahweh alone. Thou hast made heaven and the heavens of heavens, or in the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth, and all the things that are in. Right, because we know that everything in creation really came from the Lord, right? So you had the heavens that we have now, and then you have the heavens of heavens, right? Because we have, our atmosphere, but outside that you have space, okay, and then you also have the heaven, which is known as the spirit world, right? And all the hosts, right, be it in the skies or in the spirit world, angels, spirits, all of them all come from Yahweh, right, through Yahweh Shai. So it's continuing, and all things that are therein, the seas and all that is therein, and thou preservest them all, and the host of heaven worshipeth thee, right, the angels. Now it says thou preservest them all, yeah, because you would think, right, with birds, which don't, matter of fact, before I even say that, let me just I think this is Matthew 6. Let's see. Yeah, this is Matthew chapter 6, verse 26. And I believe this is what Yahweh Shai said. This was him speaking, right? And it says here, behold, as he was exhorting the disciples not to worry about food and clothing and all of those things, but to keep their focus first and primarily on the kingdom of heaven, on doing the will of the Lord. And he goes on to mention, right, behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not. When you sow, you plant, neither do they reap. So you don't ever see a bird, a raven, an eagle, whatever, with a plowshare, and two other birds or beetles, you know what I'm saying, dragging it, and is breaking up the ground so it can plant seeds and all of that. You don't see them do that, right? But they don't plant, they don't harvest, they don't gather crops into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? So the heavenly Father feeds these birds by various ways, means, shapes, and forms. They're always provided for. And it's not just birds, but everything in the ecosystem. Hence, these creatures don't go extinct. So the Lord designed really the earth to be self-sustainable. And so going back to Nehemiah chapter 9, as it mentions, right, that thou preservest them all, from man all the way to a ladybug, the Heavenly Father still is the one that provides us the necessities needed for us to survive. Verse 7, thou art the Lord Yahweh the God, who didst choose Abram, and broughtest him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees, and gavest him the name Abraham. Right, and we know Abram, which that was his original name. And I believe Abram in the Hebrew is Abba Ram, which is Father exalted or exalted Father. And that's the word Abba, which is Father, and Ram going into that, exalt. And if we look up the name Abram here, right, Abba Ram, exalted Father. And it doesn't look like they break it up here, but that's when you break up the word or the name, that's what you get. It says here, and broughtest him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees. So now let's take a look here, and let's type in Abraham, not Lincoln, journey from Ur to Canaan, and it'll give us it's not perfect, but it's it's a good estimate or a good outline here. Okay, so here you can see this is just a physical visual of a diagram of the likely path for Abraham's travel. Of course, it wasn't just Abraham alone, right? But his travel with him and his family out of Ur. So Ur being all the way here, southern Mesopotamia in the east, right? The land of Shinar. And Ur was known as, it was also one of those famous early cities, right? In civilization here, post flood. Right, you had Uruk, and I think you had Babel as well, but you had a few of those what they call first, civilizations or cities, Sumer and all of them. But anyway, Abraham being here in Ur, the Lord came onto him and had him go from Ur all the way down to the land of Canaan, in which his a good portion of his family ended up staying here in Haran, right, in Syria, which is where Jacob ended up going, right, to flee from Esau's wrath to his uncle Laban, which is over there. So going back to Nehemiah, chapter 9, verse 7, right, thou didst choose Abram, and broughtest him forth out of Ur of the Chaldees, and gavest him the name Abraham. So now you go from Abram or Abaram to Abraham or Abaraham, and that goes from exalted father to father of a multitude, okay, or father of many nations. And we can look into that here as well. So we have Abraham, and as it goes into father of a multitude or chief of multitude. Okay, so continuing on. Verse 8, and foundest his heart faithful before thee. His heart meaning his mind. So his mind was loyal to the Lord. And we've all read the story of Abraham, or at least we should have. It was so much so that he was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, right? Because the Lord had asked him to. So the Lord verified indeed that Abraham was faithful to him. It says, and madest a covenant with him to give the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Jebusites, and the Girgashites, to give it, I say, to his seed, and has performed thy words, for thou art righteous. Yeah, and the Lord did say that, right? The Lord did tell Abraham that all that land that he saw would all be for basically him and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob. And lo and behold, guess who was in the land? The same ones the Lord promised it to. Verse 9, and didst see the affliction of our fathers in Egypt, and heardest their cry by the Red Sea, and shewest signs and wonders upon Pharaoh and all of his servants. Right, so now recollecting, going back to the time of the Exodus, how we were in Egypt, suffering under the hand of the Egyptians, and the Lord looked upon the affliction of his people and had mercy. Hence he raised up Moses. Okay, had Moses born and raised for that very purpose. Because if you look at the life of Moses, it was literally set for that very purpose, to play that role of delivering the children of Israel out of Egypt to the promised land, though he himself wasn't allowed to go in. Continuing, it says here, and sheweth signs and wonders upon Pharaoh and all his servants. Right, there you go into the plagues that the Lord brought upon Egypt, and on all the people of his land. For thou knewest that they dealt proudly against them. So thou didst get thee a name, as it is this day. Right, so the Lord knew and saw how the Egyptians were dealing with us, and by bringing that judgment upon them, his name was permeated throughout the whole earth. And people feared him because they heard about what he did to Egypt. And thou didst divide the sea before them, right? The Gulf of Suez, right? That portion actually, when they're crossing over from Egypt right into the wilderness, as it says, thou didst divide the sea before them, so that they went through the midst of the sea on the dry land. And their persecutors, the Egyptians, thou threwest into the deeps, as a stone into the mighty waters. And how did the Lord do that? Well, when the Egyptians pursued the Israelites, after the Israelites had crossed on dry land, then as the body of water was raised up, right, because it was divided. So on one side it was like a giant wall, and on the left side it was also like a giant wall, and these Egyptians were now in the middle of it. So imagine looking up so high you can't even see the height of this wall of water, and now it comes crashing down on you. I mean, the pressure alone would probably kill you instantly, but yeah, that would have been a terrible sight. Verse 12, moreover, thou leddest them in the day by a cloudy pillar, which was a chariot, right? Today would be known as a UFO. But as it says, in a cloudy pillar, and in the night by a pillar of fire, to give them light in the way wherein they should go. Yep. Thou camest down also upon Mount Sinai, and spakest with them from heaven, and gavest them right judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments, and madest known unto them the holy Sabbath, and commandedst them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant. And that's why, right, let's actually go into these three here. We have precepts, okay, looks like Matazawa. It says here, yep, that makes sense. Commandment, right? Commandment. We have statutes. Chak. All right, it says statutes, ordinate, something prescribed. Prescribed task. Prescribed portion. Okay, conditions, decrees, civil enactments. So let's actually type that in here. Civil enactments. See what it tells us. A civil enactment is a process of making a law or the law itself, right? So when you read in the time of the wilderness, remember when you read in the Torah, it's broken up right into sections where there are certain laws regarding penalties, right, for doing certain actions, and penalties for not doing certain actions. Then there's also, situations there. It's described what is the protocol to take when this happens, because it's not everybody gets put to death. Some tell you, okay, you become unclean. What happens when you're unclean? You can't do X, Y, and Z, right? So when you go into the law, it consists of just more than just a straightforward law. You break it, there's a penalty, right? It also goes into what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to conduct yourself with your fellow Israelite, what holy days to keep, what makes you clean, what makes you unclean, who's allowed to do what. All of these things that govern a way of living are all in there. That's why you have the precepts, the statutes, right, and the laws. Let's see what we got in here. Yep. Thawa Ra, Torah, right? Instruction, direction, law, direction, instruction, body of legal directives, body of priestly direction or instruction, which is all in there, right? When you read in the scriptures, especially in those first 5 books, you'll get all the instructions on what the priests were supposed to do, what they weren't supposed to do, and who could do what, when, all of those things, right? Even the law on sacrificing. So these were all in there, and they were prescribed to the Israelites at this time by Moses, right? By the hand, the Most High through Moses. Verse 15, and gave us them bread from heaven for their hunger, which was that manna, and brought us forth water for them out of the rock for their thirst, and promised them that they should go in to possess the land which thou hadst sworn to give them. But they and their fathers dealt proudly, and hardened their necks, and hearkened not to thy commandments. So they became disobedient, and refused to obey, neither were mindful of thy wonders that thou didst among them. So the Lord parted the sea in half for us to go through, feeding us with manna, having a chariot discomfit the Egyptians and lead us in the morning and night, and all of these things went out the window. It says, but hardened their necks, and in their rebellion appointed a captain to return to their bondage. So they actually set up people to lead them to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to Egypt because they were complaining, oh, you brought us here to kill us, and the food here is trash, and all of that stuff. But thou art a God ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness, and forsookest them not. See, so the Lord could have done away with us. He could have forsaken us in the wilderness, but he didn't. Yea, when they had made them a molten calf, that golden calf, right, and said, this is thy God that brought thee up out of Egypt, and had wrought great provocations. Yet thou in thy manifold mercies forsookest them not in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud departed not from them by day, to lead them in the way, neither the pillar of fire by night, to shew them light, that the way wherein they should go, and the way wherein they should go. So the Lord could have said, call that chariot back. No, leave them out there, and then send the wild animals upon them. He could have done all of that. But even that's why it mentions the great provocations, because they provoked the Lord a lot. But even still, he remained faithful, because A part of it was that he did promise Abraham that he would give this land to Abraham's descendants. Verse 20, thou gavest also thy good spirit to instruct them, and withheldest not thy manna from their mouth, and gavest them water for their thirst. See? And when you read about it, in fact, I think in the book of Wisdom of Solomon, it talks about how the manna was like angel's food, to the point where it accommodated to everybody's taste, to where it tasted good to everybody. Yea, 40 years didst thou sustain them in the wilderness. So they lacked nothing, their clothes waxed not old, and their feet swelled not. So they weren't making stops at Levi's and and Macy's and Burlington to grab new boots, and they weren't doing that. And this was like generations. So how, going from being a youth all the way to being old, and yet you're still wearing the same clothes, and you're still able to wear the same, as it mentions, their feet not swelling and their clothes not waxing old. So the Lord had it to where our clothes still fit us, right? We were still sustained and supplied for, even in this time. Verse 22, moreover, thou gavest them kingdoms and nations, and didst divide them into corners. So they possessed the land of Sihon, and the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, king of Bashan. And when you read in the book of, I believe it's in the book of Numbers, it goes into that, right? How, the Lord blessed us to start taking down these nations on our way to the land of Canaan. Their children also multipliest thou as the stars of heaven, and broughtest them into the land, concerning which thou hadst promised to their fathers, that they should go in and possess it. So the children went in and possessed the land, and thou subduest them before the inhabitants of the land. Oh, Slakia, thou subduest before them the inhabitants of the land. Read in the book of Joshua, right, about how the Lord was with us and how we kept taking down these nations that were in the way, and that was by the hand of the Lord. The Canaanites, and gavest them into their hands with their kings, and the people of the land, that they might do with them as they would. Some places the Lord told us to completely destroy, men, women, children, burn down the cities and everything, right? Let nothing remain, but smite the city with the edge of the sword. Verse 25, and they took strong cities and the fat land, and possessed houses full of all goods, wells digged, vineyards and olive yards, and fruit trees in abundance. So they did eat, and were filled, and became fat, and delighted themselves in thy great goodness. Right. So we took the land, we took the fields, we started reaping the benefits. Verse 26, nevertheless they were obedient. Right. The scriptures talk about Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Right. So it says here, they where we at? Verse 26, nevertheless they were disobedient, and rebelled against thee, and cast thy law behind their backs, and slew thy prophets, which testified against them, to turn them to thee, and they wrought great provocations. See, so they got in the land, the Lord brought them there, and then they started their madness again. They stopped adhering to the ways of the Lord, right? They rebelled against the Lord. As it says, they cast thy law behind their backs. So then they started committing all sorts of wickedness against the laws of the Lord, and slew thy prophets. So those that the Lord sent to come and correct them, they slew them. Right? Even one example is when you go during the time of Jezebel. How even though Obadiah, as it says, the servant of Ahab, he hid 100 prophets in the cave. Why? Because they were slaying the prophets. And that wasn't the only time. Verse 27, therefore thou deliverest them into the hand of their enemies, who vexed them. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven. And according to thy manifold mercies, thou gavest them saviors, which were judges, who saved them out of the hand of their enemies. So what happened? The Lord brought us into the land. Then we started going off. Then the Lord started raising up the neighboring nations to come against us and to subject us and for us to be to be made low, right, under them. As it says, that's why it talks about the enemies who vexed us. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried unto thee. So when you read in the book of Judges, you'll see this a lot, right? Israel will be under a certain nation, whether Midianites or Moabites or whatever nation there. And then we would cry unto the Lord. Then he would raise up a judge, right? Gideon or I forgot the name of these other judges, but you had the time with Deborah and Barak, right? And there's one in particular who had what's that thing called? A gold. Forgot his name, but you read the book of Judges, you'll see it's in there. So the Lord raised them up, and then they would lead Israel to fight against our enemies and to be delivered. And then Israel would follow the ways of the Lord so long as the judge was alive, and the second the judge died, they would go right back to their madness. So as it mentions here, when they cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven, and according to thy manifold mercies, thou gavest them saviors, who saved them out of the hand of their enemies. But after they had rest, they did evil again. And as you read the book of Judges, you'll be like, man, well, what type of, it's just back to back to back. They go off, they go into another nation, they pray, they cry, the Lord delivers them, they get a little bit of a break, they go right back to their madness, over and over and over again. As it says, but after they had rest, they did evil again before thee. Therefore leftest thou them in the hand of their enemies, so that they had the dominion over them. Yet when they returned and cried unto thee, thou heardest them from heaven, and many times didst thou deliver them according to thy mercies, right up until the point where the Lord just had enough, and testifiedest against them by way of the prophets, that thou mightest bring them again unto thy law. Yet they dealt proudly, and hearkened not unto thy commandments, but sinned against thy judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. Right, so the same judgments, the commandments that if you follow, you're going to live, they transgressed those, and withdrew the shoulder, and hardened their neck, and would not hear. And what that means is another way of saying that they were disobedient, stiff-necked, hard-headed. Imagine somebody's walking in front of you, you're trying to get their attention, they keep walking, so you grab their shoulder to turn them around, and they just pull back the shoulder. That's a sign of one that is stuck in their ways. They don't want to hear it. And that was our people. But it's still a majority of them today. Yet many years didst thou forbear them, and testifiedest against them by thy spirit in thy prophets. Yet would they not give ear. Therefore gavest thou them into the hand of the people of the lands. So then the Lord said, all right, you don't want to take heed? I'm going to now have you be subject unto the nations. Nevertheless, for thy great mercy's sake, thou didst not utterly consume them, nor forsake them, for thou art a gracious and merciful God. So even when the Babylonians, for example, or the Assyrians came and took us down, the Lord had it to where in that judgment, it was according to measure. So we weren't utterly destroyed. Now therefore our God, the great and mighty, and the terrible God, who keepest covenant and mercy, let not all the trouble seem little before thee, that hath come upon us, on our kings, on our princes, and on our priests, and on our prophets, and on our fathers, and on all thy people, since the time of the kings of Assyria unto this day. So they're saying, appealing to the Lord, saying, please don't consider these things a light thing that have come upon us, right? From the time when the Assyrians came over and subjected us, eventually besieging the northern kingdom, taking them out of the land, so on and so forth, up until this day. Now at this point, we're at, the Persians are in power, all right, but we're past the beginning phases, right? We're past Darius and Xerxes and Cyrus and all that. This is now during the reign of Artaxerxes. Verse 33, howbeit thou art just in all that is brought upon us, for thou hast done right, but we have done wickedly. See, so, don't look at it like it's a light thing, but at the end of the day, we deserve it, right? The Most High is the one in the right in this case, really in every case. But neither have our kings, our princes, our priests, nor our fathers kept thy law, nor hearkened unto thy commandments and thy testimonies, wherewith thou didst testify against them. And the Lord testified against them by way of the prophets, to come and call to remembrance their iniquities, and let it be known, you're doing this, stop doing this. If you don't stop doing this, the Lord is going to do this, right? And that's why it says, Isaiah 58, I believe, right? Lift up thy voice like a trumpet, cry aloud and spare not, and show my people their transgressions. That's a part of testifying against them. Verse 35, for they have not served thee in their kingdom, and in thy great goodness that thou gavest them, and in the large and fat land which thou gavest before them, neither turned they from their wicked works. Behold, we are servants this day, and for the land that thou gavest unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof, and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. Right, so even up until now, you gave us this land for our inheritance, and yet we're servants in our own land, right? Because this land has now become a province under the Persians. Verse 37, and it yieldeth much increase unto the kings whom thou hast set over us because of our sins. Also they have dominion over our bodies and over our cattle at their pleasure, and we are in great distress. So this is, humbling ourselves before the Lord, acknowledging our iniquities, and begging the Lord's mercy, to say, like, we're in a condition now where we're in the land you gave us, but we don't even own ourselves, right? Our cattle or our land is all subject unto another. Verse 38, and because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites, and priests seal onto it, right? To basically follow the ways of the Lord, right? To separate themselves from the heathen and the iniquity, okay, of them and their fathers, basically to turn over a new leaf. All right, but as we keep on going, we'll see just how long that lasts, because this wouldn't be the first, right? Anyway, that brings us to the end of the book of Nehemiah, the 9th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Wadash. Until next time, Shalom.